Well, Jack, in the long, long history of the Mercer Law School, there's one event that is safely called a watershed, I think, and that was the Woodruff gift. Tell us how you found out about that. What happened, and how did that news come to the faculty?
Oh, well, the news to the faculty. Well, let me back up from the way we presented it to the faculty. Carl had told me that he had gone up and met with George Woodruff and other members of the Woodruff family, along with Kirby and Kirby Gutz, who was the president of the university, and Bob Steed. Griffin Bell may have been there for some of those meetings as well. And so Carl called me into the office and said, "Jack, I want you to set up a little gathering for the faculty and staff. I've got some good news to deliver." And he told me what the news was. And we went over to, well, I'm not sure where we did the presentation now. It was one of the houses there in the neighborhood that was owned by the university at the time. And he gave them the good news. At that time, it was one of the largest gifts, not to a university, but to a law school. And certainly, I think the largest gift to a law school our size. So it was pretty dramatic.
Okay. And the dollar amount of the gift was how much?
At that time, it was $10 million. That's a while back.
Right. Back when 10 million was really 10 million.
Yeah, right.
It was real money. So a decision needs to be made about how this is going to be handled, what it's going to be used for, and in what way.
Okay, well, Carl stepped down from the deanship, and we eventually hired Phil Shelton. Carl and Phil were dramatically different kinds of dean, both very, very good in their own ways, but Phil was absolutely perfect for this project. Phil's initial decision was that, at first it took a little while. I mean, obviously we have to wait for Woodruff to die, and this is, and then it had to be worked out with the trust company and how that was going to be set up and so forth. So Phil's initial decision, this was a stroke of genius, is that you're not going to be able, well, I'm not going to let you, talking to the faculty, spend any of this money or spend money on yourself. Because the faculty was very badly underpaid at the time in comparison with other similarly situated law schools. I'm not going to let you do any of that until you come up with an exciting educational program for this law school. That was genius. It stopped people from fighting over the money. He assigned the three of us, Hal Lewis, Dick Creswell, and me. And actually, I think he went to Hal and Dick, and that Hal and Dick said, "You need to get Jack." I think that's how that played out. And we spent the entire summer working on this. But the first thing that we did after we appointed was we went around to every single faculty member and said, what should we be doing? What's important here? Not what courses do you want in the curriculum, not any of that stuff, nothing about the nuts and bolts of this, but what kind of law student should we be graduating? That was a question that we asked.
Now, time frame, this is when? What year?
Well, we're late 80s, I want to say.
I think that's right.
Yeah. I'm not sure what year it was. I have to go back and check.
Okay.
So we went around and talked with all the faculty, and a theme emerged from those.
These are individual conversations.
Individual conversations, every single faculty member. What kind of lawyer should we be graduating? We decided to ask the question that way. What should they know? What kind of person should they be? What,
start at the end.
Yes, start at the end and work backwards. And it's amazing to me that law schools don't do it that way. The law schools traditionally have started from, we know what we want in the first year, let's then see what else is needed, and the second and third years make then no sense at all,
right,
for the most part. So a theme emerged, and I think it surprised us a little that it was professionalism and ethics, that they wanted to be identified as producing lawyers who were professional, who were ethical. And that should be how we should start thinking of the identity of Mercer graduates.
Do you remember how that was articulated? I mean, was it articulated overtly in that way, or was it? Okay.
It really was overt. I remember some of those conversations. Oh, a vivid one was with Reynold Kosick, who's no longer with us. He was abundantly clear that there's just no question about this, that our theme, he put it in the terms that you and I would have used, our theme is professionalism. That's what we should be doing. That, don't know exactly what that means, but that's up to us to figure it out. That should be the central characteristic of the graduate of the law school. So, now this, people were saying, well, no, that's Jack talking, but it really wasn't. I didn't do that.
And so they send you, the committee a clear message that that's the end goal, and then it's up to you all to begin to try to craft a way to get there.
Well, and what was implicit in asking the question that way is what you picked up on, is that we're going to start from the end and work backwards. So rather than this being the usual, should CP, civil procedure, being the first year or the second year, or should we continue with statutory law or not, our thinking was going to be driven by what we want to accomplish.
Okay.
The only way that it makes sense to me, so I was glad to see that people, and doing it that way meant that everybody's ox could get gored. And if you do it the other way, then immediately some oxes are gored, not others. So ours had the potential of goring everybody's ox, and that was a great value.
Okay.
Plus the motivation of the money.
Right. Well, walk me through the process, and then I do want you to talk about what the end result was. Now, you and I both know that in the years since this was adopted, the Woodruff curriculum has changed. Some would say it's been eroded and so on. But walk us through the process, and then what it looked like when eventually you all voted to put it in place.
Well, when Hal and Dick and I started at the end, we started thinking about these advanced simulation courses that were to be practice-based. So there would be students in simulated representations in various substantive areas, advanced tort work, business, small business, domestic, you name it, and that these would be selected by the students that have a requirement of this advanced simulation work, but that these would be selected by the students in an attempt to match up not just with their interests, but at that point what they knew they were going to be doing in practice. And we wanted enough of those that we could meet most of the needs. And
this is to take the place of the clinical experience in some sense.
Well, that's part of it.
And make it available for everybody.
That's part of it. And then we said, if students are going to be doing that, and yes, in order to avoid the finances of clinic and the like, they're going to have to do the simulations. And that's going to mean that current faculty have to buy into the practice in a way they haven't in the past. But we can work on that. So we started thinking, well, then what courses are preparatory for that? And what other things are needed? So certain skills started popping up as needed. We set up the Introduction to Counseling, which is really interviewing and counseling, as a required course. Can we place that within the curriculum somewhere? Unlikely, but we can do it as a workshop. We did it's now mediation, but it was intended to be dispute resolution as an introduction to the third year. So the Introduction to Counseling was supposed to be an introduction to the second year, the dispute resolution, introduction to the third year. We already had an introduction to law, which is really an introduction to legal analysis, an introduction to the first year. And we said that progression makes sense, You move from the analytical, the thinking like a lawyer part, which pervades, but move into connecting that with clients and counseling, and then move there to acting upon the counseling and dispute resolution. Those should be the themes of each one of those years. And the courses within each one of those years should be geared towards that theme. Can we impose that upon faculty? No. Can we encourage faculty, find ways to encourage them to do it, to buy into that theme? We thought we could. Not with all faculty. There are some, and I won't name names, who were never going to do anything other than what they had always done. But that then set up a general progression towards practice. And we could then identify within that progression other progressions. So a progression in those skills, knowledge, attitudes that were needed for trial practice, for example, if you're going into a trial practice. And that there are various ways that students could shape their own curriculum to make it, while there was an awful lot of requirements that we had, but within those requirements you could shape a curriculum towards the lawyer that doing the type of lawyering work that you thought you were going to be doing. That was the overall idea, an awful lot of nuts and bolts. And in order to get all of that in the sixth semester, that's an awful lot of faculty resources. The sixth semester came close in its heyday to the number of faculty that were needed for clinics. In order to get all those resources there, you had to back off of resources in other places. We backed off of the first year, which would be completely rejected by many faculty at many schools. No, leave the first year alone. We know what we're doing the first year and so forth. But we had a lot of courses that were 6 or 8 credit hour courses that we thought could be reduced. What do we want them to learn out of that first year? Most of those things could be done in the time we were giving them. If you thought about the product, yes, there are it's crucial. The first year is crucial, more crucial than many people realize. The case method, I think, is crucial. All of that, I think, is crucial, not just for analytical skills, but for shaping them as lawyers, very much in the way the Marine Corps wanted to shape people to be Marine officers. They shape them all. Everybody who's an officer in the Marine Corps is trained as an infantry officer. Why? Because that's what makes you a Marine. Well, first year law school can work very much that way. It is shaping and can be shaping in that way. But those things could be done. Those things could be done within the amount of time allocated to it. We were fairly certain of that. And 2 or 3 of us were teaching the first year. I picked it up later on, teaching criminal law. We're fairly certain that it could be done that way.
And then that frees up more faculty time to do the sixth.
The other thing that I should mention is legal writing. That law schools traditionally have neglected the fact that lawyers spend almost all of their time writing, and so we wanted a legal writing curriculum that advanced as well within that. That's one of those progressions that we saw developing within it. There are various ways of approaching that. That got changed in the process, but the idea was already there.
But as part of the Woodruff curriculum, legal writing was given a new importance or centrality. In many law schools, you and I both know that it's treated as just sort of an add-on taught by adjuncts and so on. You know,
and
less so now than then, but
I was concerned about it. I was concerned about it in part because there were several members of the faculty who were adamant about hiring legal writing specialists. Well, at the time there weren't many. Right now, I've become affiliated with legal writing programs and legal writing research, legal writing rhetoric and the like, and have been writing myself in those areas for a while now. But at the time, there wasn't much developed. And I was a little skeptical about not only can you find a legal writing specialist, does that make sense, or is that the faculty's way of taking a hands-off approach, let somebody else do the dirty work, and concerned with what you suggested before about clinicians, of people within the faculty who are not really faculty, and what are you doing to them, and hiring them on short-term contracts and the like. So I had to be convinced of that. Then the people that we hired early on were so spectacular. Linda Edwards, most of all, that it seemed to me later to be a stroke of genius.
In retrospect.
Yeah.
That all makes sense to me. It always has. More of what surprised me about the Woodruff story, as I know it, is that you ever got any of it past
Yes.
any law school faculty.
Yes.
And that's not to disparage our faculty, but
That's why I didn't want to miss the opportunity to do it.
describe the process. I mean, how did you?
Oh, meeting after meeting after meeting. And that was Dick and Helen and I would do presentations on different aspects of it. Then there'd be 2-hour long discussions, and then a vote. Not a vote on the whole program, but a vote on various aspects of it. That vote wasn't binding. It was just to get an indication of how much support was there. After we completed this, it went on for months and months and months. Very interesting discussions that were friendly. Not entirely. There were a couple of people on the faculty that were hostile to the entire thing, and remain hostile to it for various reasons. We didn't vote on the entire thing until the end, and then I think we got every faculty member except 2.
So this was the era of the weekly faculty meeting.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's mind-boggling.
Yeah, I know.
And you'd get that kind of.
The amount of time that we devoted to that was astonishing. But I think people got enthusiastic that we're doing something significant here, that we had the experts come down and talk to us, and the good thing about calling the experts in was that it was clear to the faculty that they knew less about this than we did. So that really was encouraging.
Yeah.
And all right, so we get it done. It's going to take 3 years to implement it. Oh, I left out a central component. I've talked about the curriculum stuff. The law school at the time had a bar passage problem. We also had that bar passage problem, as most bar passage problems, out of the bottom third of the class. The classes were larger than we wanted them to be.
And let's get some context. How large were they? Roughly.
Similar to what you're seeing now. Not to put too fine a point on it.
So 180 or so. That's about.
Well, 170 at least. I don't know that we've ever gone to what you've got now. And with no end in sight. It was up, as far as the university was concerned, just keep growing the size of the law school until the building can't hold anymore. And we didn't want to be that school. One of the things that we agreed upon, that if you were going to do this professionalism stuff, that you needed to do it in a smaller law school in smaller courses. Notice those courses that are in the 6th semester are very small courses. You need a smaller student body, and we've got a bar problem. We need to find a way to buy seats. Now, this was the most controversial part of it. So we're taking money, and rather than spending it on God forbid the building, but rather than spending it on additional faculty, which is how most faculty would do it, or additional salary, we're going to buy seats. And I really think Hal and Dick, more than me, were the ones that were successful in making that argument. They were absolutely committed to it, for slightly different reasons, but Hal more the bar, Dick more the size of the school.
Right.
It's part of the identity that we wanted to have.
And by buying seats, of course, you mean using the gift or the income from the gift to make up for the lost tuition revenue from having a smaller
We
class.
cut the size of the admissions by a third. That's dramatic, and that costs a lot of money to do that. It was going to take us then 3 years to implement the program. Suddenly, when we get to that first class that had been cut, it was down to the size that we wanted it to be. Not just for bar passage, obviously, and not just for the size of the classes that we could then have, but for the ambiance of the school, for the atmosphere of the school, and for the identity of the school. And when we got it down to that, suddenly the bar passage skyrockets.
Right, and
That's what annoys me now when people talk about these odd little curriculum changes to improve the bar passage, and they have absolutely no idea whether it'll have any effect or not. And that's a shot in the dark when you know that if you either reduce the size of the class and focus that reduction, or you address additional resources to the bottom of the third, those are the only ways, proven ways to improve bar passage. Doesn't have much to do with whether it's this course or that course, or this course taught that way or that course.
or how many hours contracts
or
get.
how many hours, yeah. It just, I'm glad I don't have to think about that anymore, because it annoys me. I'm sorry, that was awful.
No, that's okay.
So yes, and that was, we did that, reduce the size, but Phil found a way, and this is another one of Phil's moves, that through he had a very good relationship with the central administration, later was hired by them, put in a controversial position of telling himself how to spend money at the law school. So Phil said, look, the faculty are not going to accept the full consequence of this, which means that there will be no faculty raises. There'll be no additional faculty coming in. Let's soften the blow. And we said, okay, you find the money, and he did. So there were additional hires. What did prompt that hiring that you mentioned during the break there? We did get additional people coming in, and there were faculty raises. The significant faculty raises didn't come to significantly later. That came under when Dick Creswell was dean.
Mm-hmm. When you're talking about the size of the classes, and you reduce it by a third again, let's talk numbers. The target was
Under 400.
Under 400 for the entire.
What is it now?
More than 400.
That's why it's about 5.
I'm not sure the number, but it's substantially above 400.
Yeah. That's the problem, that it's a structural problem for legal education. There's constant pressure to bring in more students. Mm-hmm. That's really what made, in addition to the curriculum, which had not been done that way as far as I knew in legal education. Mm-hmm. In addition to that, what was dramatic is we're spending money and reducing the size. Now the schools are doing it now. They're doing it of necessity now. Mm-hmm. We weren't doing it of necessity. We were doing it because we thought it was the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, you can do a much better job with fewer students.
Yes, absolutely.
But it's very expensive for the school and for the university to do it that way.
Yes.
Okay. We've been mostly talking chronologically as you've gone through your life and your career. I want to step out of that for just a second while we're talking about the Woodruff curriculum and the other changes that were made in connection with the Woodruff gift. From the perspective now of time, looking back, how would you assess or describe the success of what you all did back then?
It was, I think, extremely successful for a fairly short period of time.
Okay.
That's what I'd say. I don't want to be critical of the school as it is now. The school is changing. And it should change. There are different faculty, younger faculty, or newer faculty that have come in. We've gone through different administrations of one kind or another, both at the university and at the law school. So I don't really want to be critical of that. But for what we were trying to do, I think we were successful for about maybe 10, 12-year period. And then the significance of the curriculum itself soon well, it became less and less significant. Other things started kind of taking over.
Okay.
One of the measurements, and this was a measurement that we were very pleased about, is the feedback that we got from law firms of all stripe, small, medium, large, small city, large city, of the quality of Mercer graduates, that they were much better prepared for the practice of law than other graduates were, and would get that consistently.
Mm-hmm.
So firms started looking for Mercer graduates in the way they had not before. And this was not firms that were associated with us in the past. And I mentioned the bar passage went up dramatically, but I really think that kind of feedback from law firms was the best indicator of the success.
To what would you ascribe the for the limited duration of the success? I mean, what happened? I mean, why wasn't it sustained?
Some of it's our fault. Some of it, to do this right requires that you keep the enthusiasm for the curriculum that you had right when it was being instituted. And that's hard to do because people have their own agendas. People have their own interests, and those don't necessarily match up. So, for example, those advanced simulation courses, we had some early on that were absolutely terrific. Jim Marshall did a small business one of the best simulation courses for third-year students that I had ever heard of. And I was tracking all of that stuff. And really, we've used the word formative a lot, but very, very formative. And competing teams in the simulation and the like, very, very good stuff. Those started dropping out. People started saying, well, maybe an adjunct ought to be doing this. And just a whole series of moves like that, where we just didn't maintain the faculty's enthusiasm. We asked the faculty to take on additional work. We asked the faculty to teach new courses. We asked the faculty to teach courses outside of their areas of traditional writing and expertise. And the normal institutional forces of the law school work against that sort of cohesion. The law schools are not very disciplined places. That it's hard to pull something off like that. For better or worse, the faculty members have an enormous amount of freedom in what they end up doing. And you can say to a person teaching in the first year that, okay, this is one thing that we did. We're going to have one large section of criminal law, and then we're going to have 3 small sections of criminal law. And those 3 small sections are 2 things that should happen. One is that a client should be introduced into the conversation, and the other is that there should be writing. Right? You can say that, and for the first time they might do it,
Right.
but then soon that small section of criminal law starts looking like the large section of criminal law. And it's better because there's more interaction, but it's not different.
Right, and telling a faculty member the 2 things that they need to do is just so foreign.
It's foreign.
Yeah.
What's the name? I'm terrible with name. What's the name of the law school in Virginia? Henry Mann started focusing on economics right outside of D.C.
Oh, George Mason.
Yeah, George Mason. Larry Ripsing was teaching there for many years, and he was the head of their curriculum committee and was doing all sort of interesting things. George Mason, because they had a vision driven by law and economics of what they wanted to do, it was not like us. We were talking about a good lawyer. They were talking about a particular approach to law, and we want to turn out people who use this approach. They were and I said this at an ALS conference once, and they were the only law school in the country sufficiently disciplined to carry off something like that. And I don't know that they're still like that. They're just institutional forces that work against it. And there's also faculty sloth.
Let me shift gears for a minute, going back more to a chronological approach to this. I mean, while all of this is going on and while you're so involved in everything that's happening at the law school, you're also involved with the bar and with activities there. Now, that's not every law professor does that. A lot of our colleagues in our part of the professions remain isolated from the bar. That was important to you, to take your time and energy to do it.
Yeah.
Why was that important to you? Then we'll talk about the details of some of the
Some
things
of
you
it
did.
was I stumbled into that as well because I was a clinician, and that meant involvement in the local bar. Right after I got here, I got involved in some bar issues in Macon. In fact, Bruce Jacob, there was a judge that we had at the time, Taylor Phillips, who was teaching in our trial practice program. Forrest Mauston, who had been the director, was essentially kicking Judge Phillips out because he wanted to do trial practice in a little bit more modern, shall we say, way than Judge Phillips was, and it created a lot of problems. And there were some people in the local bar that appreciated it and others that didn't appreciate it at all. And I mean, almost the minute I walked in the door, Bruce said, "We have a problem here and it's up to you." And so I had to get immediately involved in the local bar. But the others, I guess a good bit of it came in through CLEs. When I started teaching legal ethics, there were almost no CLEs in legal ethics at the time. Bars didn't have the requirements that they do now. And I was appalled at what was happening in Macon, especially in regards to conflicts of interest, but other things as well. And figured if it was happening in Macon, it was happening elsewhere, and that I felt a bit of a crusade to say that legal ethics is not just, oh, I'm a good person, I know that I will do the right thing, that there really is a way of thinking about this. It's a lawyerly thing. That there, these regulations, or the CPR, George's version of the CPR was in effect at the Code of Professional Responsibility in effect at the time, and it wasn't great. There are all kind of problems with it. But there really should be a rigor to this. We should be able to develop a way of thinking about these issues. We're lawyers, for goodness sakes, and we weren't.
It's more than the smell test.
More than the smell test, exactly right. And so I started doing a lot of CLEs, an awful lot of CLEs, preparing voluminous material, starting with the local bar. I was investing a huge amount of time. Well, I guess my name got out there, and that's, I think, how I got all of the initial requests to get involved in various bar activities. And I'm just not good at saying no. And it's also, I had a sense of an obligation to the bar, and it was also an honor to be asked.
Sure.
So I was the vice chairman of the Formal Advisory Opinion Board. You've served on the board.
Still
I was
do.
vice chairman for, 12 years or so. And always vice chairman, never chairman, because they didn't want an academic as chair. And that was, they explained that to me, and it was fine with me, and I understood exactly why. I'd been tangentially involved with it when Leah Chanin was on the Formal Advisory Opinion Board, because she would ask me to write the opinions, and I liked that role. Then I didn't have to argue for them.
Right.
But that was good work. That was good service. And then there were a bunch of other commissions as well. The advertising, co-chair of the advertising task force. And there are actually some good things that came out of that. Initially, I organized the local Macon group to oppose, this will surprise you, going to the model rules from CPR. But Ray Patterson at the University of Georgia, who was their legal ethics specialist and a very dear friend, in fact, he asked me to take over his book. He had a textbook, and I had to tell him no, because I didn't agree with it. And he understood. But, Ray Patterson had played with those rules almost single-handedly, and in my opinion, made a mess, especially in areas like clients with disabilities and things like that. And I thought, this is worse than what you've already got. Started a campaign to stop it, and we stopped it. When the campaign then came back up a few years later, I got on board. I got a call from Bill and got on board. There were problems in it.
Bill Smith.
Yeah, who was the Office of General Counsel, head of the office. There were problems with it. And I went to Bill and said, you got problems here. He said, well, yeah, some, but where? And I came up with a whole list of things that were just mistakes, drafting mistakes. The conflicts of interest referred to provisions that were in the old, not in the new. There were a bunch of other things like that. I said, I don't do this again. I don't have to oppose it because you screwed it up. And he said, well, just go with it. We'll clean it up later on. That to address it now, because they had this blue ribbon commission do the thing, headed by a well-known judge. And he said it would just be too embarrassing to those people for us to come say you screwed it up. And I said, okay. So we went through that, and I said, Bill, you tell me, and I will send you this stuff, and drafts, everything else. I get a little committee together, and said, okay, well, that didn't happen. And I did all the work, sent it off to Bill, and he would just bury it. And some similar things happen. You've been through this experience. It's a typical bar experience, do a lot of work for nothing. On the advertising, I wanted to change the advertising rules rather significantly. I'll make this, which is a long story, very short. I wanted to change them significantly, and Bill saw the potential of litigation then. If they did change it, it was litigation we could win, but he just didn't want litigation. Let some other state do that. Florida was in the process of doing something similar. It was costing them a fortune. So he thought, we'll just let Florida do it. And so it never really went anywhere. There are other good things that did come out of the advertising task force, I think they called it. And there were a bunch of others too, but that gives you a flavor of what that one was like. And then, of course, I get, almost out of the blue, I get a call from Michael Goldberg, a rabbi who had been hired by the Georgia Supreme Court as their legal writing instructor. Michael was with McKinsey, the advertising consulting firm. He was doing text for them. And Justice Weltner had gotten to know Michael somehow. I don't know exactly how, but they became good friends, and Weltner convinced Chief Justice Harold Clark to bring Michael in to help the court in drafting its opinions. So these opinions would go to Michael, not a lawyer, he's a rabbi, and Michael would point out problems in the drafting. And the judges accepted this. Well, Weltner and Michael's was also a fairly well-known theologian with some very good books to his credit. Controversial within the Jewish community. One book called Why Should Jews Survive? And he'd also become well known for a narrative approach to ethics, taking that out of theology and writing about it. So Michael was fairly well known, and he and Charlie Weltner got along famously. And Charlie got interested in what he saw as problems within the bar that were emerging, and he described as problems of professionalism. Harold Clark was interested in a similar fashion, and they assigned that to Michael. And Michael, I don't know how he found it, but he had read this book. So Michael tells them, Michael and I are very dear friends now and have been friends for a very long time. So Michael says, well, you don't need to bring in a bunch of people. There's this guy at Mercer who seems to be the one who's writing about this stuff. And they talked to Tom Morgan, who had been the dean at Emory, and Tom knew my work well and had asked me to give talks at various places. And so Tom confirmed, and so I get this call. For me, it was out of the blue from Michael. Said, introduced himself. Said, "Would you mind coming up and meeting with the Chief Justice and Justice Weltner?" I said, "Okay, well, what is this about?" You know? So we I did that. The four of us just chatting, and we did this in numerous meetings. And finally, Weltner, who was a very pragmatic man, had gotten to the point where he said, "We know enough now. There are things that we want to do, and one of the things we want to do is the course that you're now teaching. And this is going to be a requirement of all law schools. Jack, go back, bring me that course in a week, and I'm going to get the court to adopt this as a bar requirement. You're not going to be able to be admitted to practice of law in Georgia unless you have had this course as part of your law school education." Of course, that meant you could. He worked it out for waivers of various kind. That was going to be an enormous problem. It's similar to something South Carolina had done in years past, and it was going to be a serious problem. It meant anybody applying from out of state is going to have to take a substitute for this course or certify that what they had taken in legal ethics was sufficient. They weren't going to be able to do that because most legal ethics course had nothing to do with ethics, and it was just legal regulations. So I said, okay, I'll draft something. And I drafted it up and got it up there. He gave me a few comments back, and they were in the process of doing it. And I went back. I said, "You cannot do this. It's a disaster. It'll be a disaster for me personally. Everybody will blame me, but none of all the law schools are going to go crazy as soon as they get wind of this." And he backed off and said, "Okay, well, let's find another way." And we find there's various ways. One was that he put me in charge of a committee that had representatives from all the law schools. We would work together to come up with what could be done to address professionalism of law schools. What would be your guess on how well that worked?
Well, with you in charge of it, I would be optimistic.
No, thank you for that, but no, it didn't really go anywhere. It was a lot of work and a lot of meetings and some good ideas that I hope people carried back to their law school, but nothing much coming out of that. Oh, and then later, a story that many people can tell, and I imagine Jim Elliott has done it, the Chief Justice Commission on Professionalism really arises out of those conversations.
Right, and I want to talk about that and what you remember about that and your role and all of that. I know you were a member of the commission, but what I think I'd like to do is step back for a minute and take one more break today, and then come back and talk about what led to, in your view, the concern that the justices had. What led you to write this book? Because this preceded the conversations you had. What was going on in the profession and in your own thinking that led up to these events? And in the process, we may talk a little bit about the content of this book and the theme of this book. Is that good?
You want to do that after the break?
Yeah, why don't we take a little break and then we'll...
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, sure.
Good.